Let's read from your new piece that you co-wrote for The Atlantic. You wrote this, quote, over the first month of Trump's new term, patterns have nonetheless emerged as a small crew of Musk's young technologists work their way through the federal workforce. This new unit has trained its initial attention on the key punchers who make the government work, executing Musk's belief that by controlling the computers, one could control the entire federal bureaucracy. Instead of taking command of the existing workforce, Trump's new team has pressured them to disperse, firing those who were probationary, offering buyouts to others, and subjecting many others to 15-minute interviews in what many felt were juvenile tests of their worth. The full impact of the blitz will not be known for months when the courts and Congress decide where to push back, if at all. But the scale and speed of the transformation now taking place across the executive branch are likely to leave a deep mark. And actually, we saw in the cabinet meeting yesterday, Trump elevated Musk to speak, the only person who did, mind you, not a cabinet member, and made clear that more cuts are coming. Talk to us more about this terrific reporting from you and your colleagues about just what exactly these DOGE teams are doing and how they're doing it.
Sure. So these DOGE teams come in. They're often young men who have worked with Musk before at his various tech companies, but not always. And as you just read, Musk's view, and I cannot tell you the number of people in the White House and in the administration who have said to me, you know, at first when he said that if you control the computers, you control everything, it felt a little counterintuitive. But I now understand what he means, which is the view that the computers are the one that push out the payments, that push out money to grants and loans, that decide, you know, who is getting their Medicare or Medicaid payment. And so Musk is coming in and trying to take over these systems. And we reported, it's interesting, Musk did that quote unquote pulse check, but our story ran a bit before, and at these individual agencies, there were signs of something like that to come. There were interviews where one DOGE employee, we had a recording, would ask people, federal employees with a ton of experience, sort of cavalierly, it came off to them, so what's your superpower? And they were also asked to give lists of quote-unquote wins they had had and blockers, which feels a bit like the precursor to this email of 5 bullet points explaining what you're doing. And I watched that cabinet meeting yesterday, and one thing that was interesting to me was Musk said, look, it wasn't a performance review, it was a pulse check to see if you have a pulse in 2 neurons. But what was sort of missed there is this sense that there's plenty of people in the federal bureaucracy who have a pulse in more than 2 neurons who are being told by someone who is viewed as President Musk on the one hand to send this email with 5 bullet points, and then they're being told by their cabinet secretary or manager absolutely not to send this email with bullet points. So that's confusing to even the most brilliant of people who are trying to figure out what to do, in which in many ways, as we documented, would be a comedy of errors, but for the fact that people's lives are at stake and their jobs are at stake.
Adrienne, then Steve. Adrienne, for Democrats, I mean, there's so much here to work with. It seems to me to stay focused on the direct impact of the chaos, the confusion, obviously the pain that we saw, the young man from the IRS who's just lost his job, and to try to give voice to that. I know that some Democratic strategists, Carville has said, lay back, play possum, but I think there is a lot to work with here, carefully and calmly, but I wouldn't step away from saying, look, this is what happens when you cut like this.
Right. And look, a couple of things on that, Mika. I think number one, when Trump initially went after USAID, a lot of Americans were like, what is USAID? Like, we don't really understand what this agency does. Is this our taxpayer dollars going to support, you know, people around the world and not domestically here at home? Which, of course, we know is not true. USAID does a lot of work here at home. But now that he's getting into some of these other agencies and he's really tackling, you know, people who are managing Medicaid, Social Security distribution, you know, people who are entrenched in their communities, there's a misnomer out there, Mika, in America, that a lot of these federal jobs are based in Washington, D.C. That is not true. I think the IRS Center has a big location in Columbus, Ohio that employs 700 people. I mean, these are people who are being impacted across the United States in their communities who provide very vital services. So I think it's incumbent on Democrats to not only push back on this, but also make it very clear that these are people who are providing very important services, that you will feel the impact if these services are not in existence in your everyday life. You simply need human beings to implement some of these really important government programs. It can't be done with AI. It can't be done, without people there to do these jobs.
I want to acknowledge a couple of realities from the administration's point of view. People get fired in America in the private sector. People get laid off. I was talking with the CEO a few days ago who was saying, after the Elon email, the 5 bullet points email, I too email with lower level employees in my companies. I too go around the managers. I want to know what's going on. So I want to acknowledge that you can do those things, but there's something else that's underlined in Ashley's reporting, which is the level of disrespect of people or disdain to people, the way in which they're communicated. And that does seem to be something that's relatable, that people also don't like when they're disrespected in the private sector. And you're beginning to hear at least a few Republicans in Congress note this and say, I want federal employees at least to be treated with respect, which is something that the administration seems to be less interested in at this point.
So, Steve, let's connect it to the paperback edition of your book. Certainly, we are deeply divided right now. The parallels do run up against some limitations. We're not at war. Certainly, Donald Trump is not Abraham Lincoln. But what are some lessons that we could be applying from then to now?
Well, one thing that's on my mind is a speech that Lincoln gave on this day 165 years ago. I'm here in New York because Lincoln spoke 165 years ago at Cooper Union. It was the beginning of his presidential campaign, and he was talking about slavery. But when I read that speech, what is striking to me is he doesn't get emotional. He uses logic. He uses reason to talk about the founding fathers and the kind of country that they wanted. And he trusted people. He trusted the public to follow his logic rather than doing a bunch of insults or whatever else he might have done. I think that sets an example for now.
NPR's Steve Inskeep, thank you so much for coming on the show this morning. We really appreciate it. His latest book, Differ We Must, How Lincoln Succeeded in a Divided America, is out now in paperback. And staff